Creating more neurodivergent-friendly classrooms matters significantly. The stakes are really high because more and more students are entering higher education who experience neurodiversity or neurodivergence in some shape, way, or form. One critical area to address is how we think about participation, because participation can be a huge barrier for neurodivergent students, especially those who are autistic or ADHD. I want to start with a really poignant quote that shows the significance of this issue. This quote comes from Margaret Price in her book, Mad at School. Price writes the following: "What does participation in a class mean for a student who is undergoing a deep depression and cannot get out of bed, or a student who experiences such severe anxiety or obsession that he can barely leave his dorm room or home? What about a student on the autism spectrum who has difficulty apprehending the subtle social cues that govern classroom participation, the difference between showing engagement and dominating the conversation, the sorts of spontaneous oral performances that are considered smart?" What Price does here is highlight the stakes of the conversation around participation and participation grades. In order to make classrooms more accessible, we really do need to think about participation and perhaps rethink how we assess participation in our classrooms. And so in this video, I'm going to cover 5.5 tips for how professors can help students achieve success, especially as it relates to participation. And the first piece of advice I have is to really reframe and rethink participation and think of it more as engagement. So instead of thinking of participation just as speaking in classrooms, ask yourself, what are the ways that students can show you that they are engaged in the content and that they care about the content of the class? And so, for example, a student might be really nervous about sharing their thoughts or opinions in classroom out loud, but every single day in class, you see them writing notes, taking notes, and even if you walk over by them, you might see that they have written notes for the class. And so that can be a way to show engagement by taking detailed course notes. So think about ways that you can really add to the ways that students can show you that they're engaged. Maybe it is by writing notes, maybe it's by talking in small group conversations. So really think holistically about all the things that a student does in order to show you that they are engaged in class. Ask yourself if your course policies discredit certain types of participation and engagement, and really try to think of, how can I include people who might be severely depressed, who might be on the autism spectrum, who may be ADHD, and help them succeed in the course. Secondly, you can create inclusive ways for people to show that they are participating. And this kind of extends from the previous suggestion to think more broadly about engagement. And in this way, we think about how are we able to get students to show that they are engaged in the course. So for example, you can use participation cards to help students show to you whether or not they have an answer to a question or not. It can be really difficult for some neurodivergent students to navigate just when they are allowed to speak. So having them raise their hands or show note cards when they have a question can help them navigate your course. You can even ask your students kind of yes or no questions and have them raise a card, a green card for yes, a red card for no, or maybe a yellow card for not sure or maybe. And those cards can help them participate in the class. And it also helps you see who is understanding what is going on, who is engaged with what is going on, because they have to raise a card when you ask those questions. You also can use index cards, so if students are too afraid to ask questions of you in the class, you might have them write on an index card and give that to you at the end of the class, so you can read the questions that students have that maybe they did not say during the class itself. So allowing for multiple ways for students to respond to you, for them to engage, can really help those students who are neurodivergent participate in the class in the ways that matter and show that they are engaged in learning the content of your course. The third piece of advice is called priming, and this involves telling your students before the class starts what they should be anticipating talking about, what kinds of questions they should be prepared to answer, and the kinds of comments that you're looking for. And so if you're going to talk about a specific reading and you're going to focus on perhaps how the author arrived at their conclusions, you might prime them by telling them, next time in class, you need to be ready to talk about how this author reached their conclusions. I actually had a professor do this in graduate school, where in the syllabus, the professor had questions that we needed to be prepared to answer in class. And so that allows students to write out their answers, think about their answers, and come to class ready to say something. And that especially helps neurodivergent students who may need a little bit more time to process questions or may be uncomfortable on the spot responding to a question. And so give them some time in advance to prepare for the conversation to help increase the accessibility of that discussion. Now, another piece of advice I have is to create assignments that are devoted to reflecting on participation and building participation skills. One of the things that I've noticed throughout my career in undergrad and graduate school is that many professors assessed participation, but very few professors actually taught participation and helped students build the skills necessary to participate and build the understanding of what is good or not good participation. And so what you can do in your class for a small number of points is to create an assignment that has students reflect on their participation and has them reflect on how they can improve. You can actually even have plans for them to implement those ideas that they have for how they can improve in the class itself. This allows you to create communication with your students about what participation is and what makes effective participation. And so I did have a professor who early in the semester always had us write a short one-page paper about how we thought participation was going, and also had us create a plan for how we can improve our participation going forward. And I suggest those kinds of assignments if you are planning to assess participation. And I also encourage you then to provide students with feedback about their participation as the semester progresses. Another thing that you can do in the class to help increase participation, especially for students who are neurodivergent, is to provide students with time to think about their answers. Some students, especially neurodivergent students, may take a moment to really process the question, process what they want to say, and prepare their remarks. And so this is as simple as allowing students to have 30 seconds to a minute to jot down their thoughts about a specific question that you just answered before you dive into the conversation. And it might even be helpful to explain to other students that is why you're doing what you are doing. You're providing everyone with an opportunity to really reflect and enhance their answers and not just go with their gut. So the last little tip I have for you is to make sure that you are talking with students who are not engaged, who are not participating, to figure out why that is the case. Do not assume that it is just simple boredom or laziness or their lack of preparation. Take some time to talk with them to figure out if there's anything that you can do to help them participate in the class in the way that you want to see happen. And so I encourage you to make sure that you're trying to reassess and rethink participation in order to enhance the accessibility of your courses for students with neurodivergence or neurodivergent students. I also think it's important as we rethink participation to also think about other ways that we can make our classes more accessible and inclusive for a variety of students. And so in our next video, we're going to move beyond participation and talk about 5 specific and actionable tips that you can use to support students